French winemakers had been living off their old production for many, many years, and they weren't living up to their work. And so that's why these California wines arrived. Of all things, were the best wines that day were the California ones.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. We are available, of course, on your favorite podcast hangouts, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, you name it. We are there, and always sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, touting some pretty interesting clubs now, the Napa Series, the Sweet Series, the Natural Wine Series, etc. This is the beginning of an incredible series of podcasts and interviews I'm going to do, and we're going to start right at the core of this whole idea of the Judgement of Paris. I have Mr. George Tabor on the line with us today, and I just want to welcome you to the show, George. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Great. Well, I'm very happy to be here with you.
Thank you. Can you tell us? I think this story needs to be told. I lived through it in my teenage years. There was a movie on it, Bottle Shock, which really didn't do the story justice after reading your book. What did the Judgement of Paris start out to be? What was Mr. Spurrier's idea in the first place? Just the cursory look at it.
Well, he basically, he didn't consider it to be, the type of an event where, the big winners and big losers, but just basically to show people what was happening in other places around the world in making outstanding wines.
So I've given this book, copies of the book, and you see them over my shoulder here. I've given many out to friends who are now becoming wine enthusiasts. And I had a young lady in the office yesterday, just graduated from college, and her father and I are friends, and she wants to get in the wine business. And we'll talk about that too in a little bit. But I said, before you do anything, particularly in California, you need to read a copy of this book, because it's going to tell you so much about the history and what happened back in 1976, and that carries all the way to today. And here's this wine shop in Paris, Rue de Madeleine. Mr. Spurrier is an Englishman, right?
Yep.
Who fancies himself in wine. And you're a young journalist, just out of college?
A little bit more than that, but I was still in my, I think I was still in my 20s. Certainly not 20, it was early 30s. But I was still a kid.
And so, as a journalist, you moved to Paris, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so, and this young lady is so interesting, because she's like, and I want to go to Europe, and I want to study wine. I'm like, wow, I've heard part of this story before, but what took you there as a young journalist to decide that this was the place to go? Was it the wine? Was it the food? Was it the lifestyle, the French young girls? Was it the young women there, or what?
Well, all of the above. I mean, it was, I'd heard a lot about life in France, but until you really get there, you don't appreciate what just wonderful things can happen there. The
City of Lights
had a great interest in wine, all sorts of things just happening. The fact that Stephen, who was an Englishman, why in the hell was an Englishman doing in Paris or why was an American? Why was I in Paris? And well, the answer is that they all were in love with the wine and life size, the wonderful things that happened where wine was taking place.
City of Lights.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're talking when did you get there? 70 something.
Yeah, I was there about 3 years before they actually left. Yeah.
And were you this part's just my own curiosity, because it's in your book, but I didn't quite grasp it. But were you an employee of Time Magazine, or were you an ad hoc journalist that submitted?
Well, I was a full employer of Time.
Okay, and you were
I
studying.
worked for time for a couple of years in the United States, but then, I had pretty good French. They didn't have a lot of people who could work the business, as it were, in France, and so that's how, in effect, I got there.
So were you went there particularly for food and wine, or was Time Magazine
No, no,
just for stories?
in those days, you only, you'd have in any given week in a story, you'd have 4 or 5 stories that you would have to do. So, this was just another story. I mean,
Another
it
story.
wasn't kind of the major story of my life at that point. No.
Which it did, which it turned out to be. Obviously, we're gonna
Yeah.
wait to talk about that. But so yeah, the wine trade, and I'm going to reflect back in Palos Verdes, and there's one of your paragraph, chapter 16 of the book talks about Palos Verdes actually, but that's where my dad's store was, and the wine trade in America, particularly in California, was restricted to a few great houses and some passionate people and some pioneers. There was certainly no trade. In fact, I love talking about the idea that I would stock the shelves with Sebastiani and it would say 100% Cabernet on the label because we were so proud of the idea that we didn't blend grapes in those days. But my dad's shop was sort of a forefront of Los Angeles. There were 5 shops. If you talk to Bruce Nyer, he'll tell you there were 5 shops in 1972 that you could visit in Los Angeles to sell anything. And
Wow.
AD Wine is one of them. So I know that Patricia Gallagher is part of this, and there's this idea now. Rue de Madeleine. Okay, well, actually, I have a different question. What was the climate of wine in Paris? Obviously, the French love their wine; they're much more acclimated to it at that time than America was. Was the corner wine shop a regular thing in Paris?
Oh, yes, very much so. And then, what Stephen was smart enough to know was, that he could become the wine master for Americans, Englishmen, all the foreigners around Paris, and that's why he got there.
See, he's due on the show. I guess he's coming to Napa in a few months, and I'm going to meet him up in Napa and try and podcast with him. He's a friend. He's a good friend of another friend of mine, Melvin Masters, who's a great negociant. So here you are. How did you hear about the idea that Stephen Sperry was going to put on this California versus French tasting? Was it a
Well, so Stephen had a variety of things that happened. He would do things that a lot of Frenchmen wouldn't do, and so he would just, if he wanted to do something, he said, "Okay, let's do it. We'll get a couple of bottles of wine and see what it tastes like," and that's what he was always there. So he always had something new and something property that was good for him.
Something was going on.
Because his main job was, of course, to sell wine.
Right. That's what he went for. But the English sort of controlled through the 50s, really the distribution of Burgundy and Bordeaux in England. Right. They were quite prolific in the trade of wine, French wine.
Oh, sure, for thousands of years.
Yeah, they pretty much run the show, right? And that's so. He has a store. I don't remember what Patricia Gallagher's relationship with him was. Was she part of the school that he was putting on? Is that what?
Exactly. Yeah, they had schools and programs and things like that. And that's how I attended a couple of those things, and that's how I first heard about the Judgement of Paris coming. Just because I was there.
So you attended those on as just a personal. Education on wine. You liked wine.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm gonna go check it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, wine was still, for me in those days, it was something almost very hard to get your hands around it. I wasn't an expert in it. And so, it was great to have somebody like Patricia and Stephen who could tell you about a wine tasting. Or he also had shops, not shops. He also had, visits around the various wineries.
Oh yeah, right. Little tours and things.
Yeah.
So I just want to place myself there, right? Because if you read A Movable Feast from Ernest Hemingway, and you read about the romance of Paris in the 20s, and you fast forward, I think there was still tons of romance in the 70s. It was still not as commercial as it is today, and the Champs-Élysées was, a place to hang out. And here's this young Englishman who's got a wine shop, he's got a class, and here's a young American who's come there to just document something in the French culture.
Learn about wine. I mean,
about wine.
I was in France at that time, but I didn't know an awful lot about wine. When I had grown up in California, we never had wine at home. It's hard.
It's true.
Every night I have a wine today, but in those days I never just had.
Where did you grow up in California?
At Riverside.
On Riverside. Wow. Well, that's the birthplace of wine in California, right? I mean, Cucamonga, the 1700s. This is a great story. I don't know if you've read the book from Francis Deaconspiel. It's called Tangled Vines. It's an incredible story. It's the arson, murder, and fraud in the wine business. That's what the story is. So it starts in Rancho Cucamonga and the plantings in the 1700s and how it moved to Napa. But that's a different story. She's going to be on the show too soon. Okay, so I grew up with the picture, the iconic picture of my dad's store, and my father and I is standing in front of his first display of the Wine of the Month Club. This is 1975. And we had featured the Chateau Montelena 72 Chardonnay. And, we were well acquainted. My dad was on his way as a very academic guy. He's got his master's in pharmacology. So he's trying to understand wine, having bought a wine shop. And you're in Riverside, and, the culture of wine really wasn't around here. It was more on the East Coast, I think, probably because we're so much closer.
I think there was a lot more wine in those days and on the East Coast than there was on the West Coast.
In fact, one of the stories, my dad was reading an article in the LA Times in 1959 or 58 when Queen Elizabeth came here, and Dwight Eisenhower hosted her, and he poured Charles Krug Vineyard Select at one of the lunches, not at the dinner. It was the first time a president had poured a California wine there. So, history goes back to the 50s. So, so now I've got Steven Spurrier and Patricia Gallagher to put on these things. There's a young George Taylor there who's documenting things in Paris. And I understood from your book that they invited, Gaumillot and Michelin and all the rest of the periodicals, and possibly some American ones, maybe Life magazine as well, to come to this tasting.
Yeah. And no, because, and nobody thought anything would be happening there. I mean, everybody knew the French were going to win. I mean, of course, it's crazy to even have this thing, but if you're going to have it, if the French are going to win, so why waste the time of going to have? But I was lucky, smart.
Yeah.
I decided to show up and see what happened.
We kind of give ourselves enough credit, even when things maybe we don't know that we're being lucky or that we're being smart, but whatever it is, it created this amazing opportunity. In fact, I have a copy of the magazine here. And just to highlight that, Jim Barrett did walk into my dad's store after the June 7th edition of the Time magazine from 1976 and said, "Not bad for a couple of guys from the sticks," which became one of his famous quotes, right?
Yes.
And they had tasted together at Les Amis de Vente. So tell me what the structure of the tasting was. What, from your book, is very granular about what happened, but he decided to use French judges, which is an amazing idea in itself, right?
Right. Yeah, because in fact, I think one of the things that's really important to understand was the way that what Stephen was doing was to try to introduce to the French, not to the Americans, but to the French, what was happening in wine in other places of the world. And California, it was just one of those places that was also making wines. Most Frenchmen never had tasted a wine, but Stephen that didn't matter to Stephen. He just wanted to show it to the Frenchmen of what was going on in the United States, and especially in California.
So he invited chefs, he invited noted wine authors, noted wine critics, people
He got the best that he could do.
really.
And he got the best. There was just no question about it. He didn't go out in the field and said, grab somebody. And these, he went out and said, okay, look, I'm really important. If you want to have something to do with today, come and taste this wine tasting. You might find it's interesting. But nobody had ever said, hey, the California wines are going to win.
Yeah. Well, my guess would be that they're like, oh, I'll do it for fun to see some old friends, maybe,
Sure. Oh, yeah,
have a good time.
Yeah.
So, and it was held in a hotel. It's still there. Forgot the name of the hotel now.
Yeah.
He took it, but he got a room in a hotel.
It's in my book.
Yeah, it's in the book. And they have, I forgot how many judges there were. 9, 8.
Yeah, 8, 9, something like that.
Yeah, and so tell me about like you're sitting there, you're this young man, you've learned a little bit more about wine since you got there, and you respect these people that are sitting there. And one of the things
that was really important was since I was the only journalist that was there that day, I could go around and I could listen to the winemakers, do their testing, make their comments and all that. So, very quickly it became interesting because the judges were starting to get confused. They didn't just pick up a glass of wine and say, oh, that's French wine. It's an excellent wine.
Yeah.
This other stuff. Well, I don't know what this other stuff is, but that must be California because it's terrible. And then I'd look at the card and I'd say, hey, they had just tried French wines and the California wines, and these guys, they liked California wines better than their own.
So but the format was double blind, right? So they bagged them and they actually decanted them.
Yeah.
They took them out of their original bottle so the Frenchman couldn't decide based on the bottle.
They did it all, correctly.
Yeah. And so there's a comment in your book, and it's also my dad's newsletter, which you must have gotten from your article in Time Magazine, about one of the judges saying, after you tasted, I think one of the whites, he thought it was tasting Merceau, and he was actually drinking one of the shards. And he said something like, we're back in France.
And he tried, what was the wine he got? He got the California right there.
I mean, you and I know how hard it is, even for a trained somm or a trained master of wine to identify like that, right? It's not that easy. And there's a lot of elements that could confuse you. And here these folks are in this area, and they're pretty confident now he's these were,
these were the best wine experts that France had to offer.
That's amazing. And so now we've tasted all the white wines, and then they scored them by the group. So they did the whites first, and then they announced the results at that point.
Yes.
And how was that? What was the temperature of the room at that moment?
Well, at that point, then there was a lot of concern that in effect they had selected the California wines first. And so they wanted to make sure it wasn't going to happen the second time in a row. And sure enough, second time in a row, they lost. The California wines won.
Well, it's not
the French. They just did not understand what was happening.
When we look at the score, and my dad published those two in his newsletter, and you have them here in your book. The Chardonnays, the whites dominated. They didn't just win.
Yeah.
I think the top 6 spots were 4 of them were California, or at least half. And the Reds didn't fare quite as well, but they did very well. Besides Warren's, top position, the other brands did really well too. And so I just, so it happened. Okay, it happened. And there's the stories of the judges wanting their scorecards back. And don't you dare, take this off my desk and publish it. And they figured their job was on the low. Yeah, it could be on the line. Right?
Yeah,
incroyable. This is impossible. So you have these results, but it's still right. Is it still a story at that point? Is it a story yet? It's probably confined to the streets of Paris at that point. Even in your magazine article. I mean, I'm going to pull it out here and just show the audience that's watching the podcast. There's just one column in the magazine, right? It's just it's kind of buried deep in the thing, and I don't even see a byline.
There was no byline. Time didn't have had all the stories in the magazine were not written all covered by somebody all the time. Yeah, that was it.
So there it is. Was there a chance that this was not going to get published?
It could have well have happened, because I think if the California wines had won, say, half of the competition, I think the Time would not have published the story.
Really?
It had to be that the California wines had won in both categories, both California and French had won. Then then it was then you had a good story.
But it was still a sort of a slow propagation around the States for this to mean anything. It just seemed like it still needed traction.
Right.
And I know that even, I think you mentioned your depth of your book is amazing, and understanding it. And I have all my friends that have read it now. They talk about Mike Gergich now. They talk about Warren Winiarski, and here's, I think was it Mr. Barrett or Mr. Winiarski was just sort of like out in the vineyard, and so he goes, "Hey, we won." They're like, "Okay, great. What's for dinner?"
Well, yeah, they didn't have any contact, they had no belief in that this was going to change their whole lifetime.
Yeah,
and that's what it did. It just made their lives, it made their profits and everything. Just suddenly, California wines were over the map. Were been expected to win for that day, and they got killed by the French.
But it wasn't it also, though, at that time, the French, the Bordeaux industry in particular, was sort of in its ebbs and flows anyway, but it was not in a great state in the 70s. The popularity of its sales volume, I think quality control was wasn't there a problem there?
Yes, yeah. Both of the French winemakers have been, been living off their old productions for many years, and they weren't living up to their work, and so that's why when these California wines arrived.
Yes.
And what of all things were the best wines that day were the California wines.
So that's fascinating to me because of those. You and I know we've been in this business a long time. We see it ebb and flow. We see things come and go. We see trends come and go. Bordeaux, you always thought it's been here for 100 years or thousands of years, really. Since 1200. You don't think there's anything different than what you know today. But there was these issues then about quality and production quality, and now there's a chink in the wall, so to speak.
Yeah.
I want to touch one thing. When you write a story like this, and you wrote your story, you went back to your flat or your apartment, wherever you're staying, you wrote the story, and today it's so easy, right? We can just clip it to an email or even just write it live in somebody else's database. What did you do then? Did you type it yourself and mail it? What was it? Teletyped? What happened?
Well, no, it was the time had because they had stories for everything, stories for several countries, and so it was important to have a good copy, clean copy that would get to Paris and get to California.
And how did that happen? Was it just mail?
No, it was telephone.
I see. Okay, yeah. Wow. Because say we take it for granted today, right? Here you are. Here you and I are talking on a camera in Rhode Island, and we can say whatever we want, and it's instantaneous. But in 1975, that was a big difference. 76. Yeah. I'm going to read something. I'm going to read chapter 16, the first part of this chapter, because I'm going to step back now that we've understand what the tasting was and what the impact in California wine was, which you haven't totally correct. But the first sentence of your book in chapter 16, on page 155 is, In the summer of 1975, Patricia Gallagher was making plans to visit her sister in Palos Verdes Estates, a wealthy coastal community south of Los Angeles. Well, I told my dad's 92 and still doing great. And I was with him. I took him a copy of this book a few weeks ago, and I read him this sentence. He goes, "Oh yeah." She says she came in the store. I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Yeah, she came in the store, introduced herself and what she was doing, and that she was on her way to Napa to choose some wines or do something. And she owned a little shop or was part of a shop in Paris." My dad speaks French, so they had a little conversation. I said, "You've never told me this story, Dad. I mean, this is important stuff." So it was in your book, you talk about how she had to find a way to get to Napa. Well, she's obviously got up there, but find a way to decide on what wines should be included and then get them back there, which apparently in a logistical headache to get samples back to Stephen for the tasting.
Yeah, because they were very worried that the control people would not allow the California wines to be, and so they had to make sure to take the wines in with a group of tourists that were coming in. So it wasn't just any freelance guy just wandering in and he dumps
right.
lots
of
wines.
So it was a French import issue or a California export issue? Like getting them out's not a problem, but getting them in was the problem.
Getting them into France was where the great problem was.
And there was some brainstorm with somebody that they're going to do this. They're going to put it with the tourists in their bags or whatever they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. So because they were always fearful that that somehow somebody's going to take away these things and end the whole story.
Yeah. Right. So how did she decide then? And it's in your book and I want people to read it, but she goes around and there's 50 wineries then? Maybe not even that many at that time.
No. In California,
15?
No. 25.
Yeah. So she went and she tasted these things and she said, well, did she taste them? Do you know if she tasted them with an opinion of whether these things could win or just like, I need to find something that is competitive?
Well, she wanted, she wanted to get something that she was sure would have the expertise of these winemakers to turn out good wine products. Because the winemakers in those days were, a lot of them were still not experts in this. They were just still getting started in wine.
Right. And so, which the story, and I have Violet Gergich coming on the show next week, actually. And I just can't wait to peel back Mike's story as an immigrant to America, an immigrant from Croatia. And, we know Mr. Barrett's story as a local attorney in Torrance who invested in this idea, which had to be a huge risk to think about. This run, it would pretty much, now it's a beautiful, gorgeous place. And it's like, Chateau Montelena exemplifies the lifestyle of Napa. And, but back then, it had been shuttered for how long? And here's like, we're going to try and make wine. I mean, not as a...
And who had ever heard of them? These were wineries that nobody had ever heard of before. So there was no recommendation that, hey, this is a very good wine. This is, these were just wines that happened to be there.
Yeah. And so she tasted them and decided, okay, we're going to get these back there. Warren's story is a little bit different, but what is this character that you think? You've got a Mike Gergich who's had some training where he grew up, came to America. I love this. Love how the picture you painted of him landing in St. Helena and, like almost leaving not even know where to sleep that night and figuring out something, just by the seat of his pants with his $32 sewn in his shoe. Mr. Barrett had funds. He had investors. He was an attorney. He was a sharp guy. It's a whole different program. Just to put on the table, his other son, Bo, is my brother's class at Palos Verdes High School.
Oh.
I threatened his secretary that if he didn't speak with me on the show soon, I would publish his high school photograph. So, and then I surfed with the younger son, Kevin, who's not in the movie or not in the part of the Winiarski. We were very young then, but that relationship goes really far back. But Warren came here to America or to California looking for something else, a break from his lifestyle, and there weren't. I can't remember in your book if you talk about UC Davis having an enology school. Then was it something you could do then, or was it not even around?
No, they didn't even have anything like that in those days.
So it was all bootstrap stuff.
Yes, yeah. There were only 2 or 3 people, only half a dozen or so people making wine in those days. I mean, no.
I suppose why they bounced around too.
Pardon me?
I suppose why they bounced around a little bit too, where Mike Gergich had worked at all those places, and Warren's experience doing the same. Because this is what fascinates me about the wine business. And I don't know about you, but this is my 30th year of tasting wines. I think I've calculated somewhere around 100,000, some ridiculous number, with a totally different approach. I mean, my approach is like based on value, but it fascinates me to see people like that. They didn't go to chemistry school. They didn't go to biology. They didn't study biology. They didn't study farming. They had a passion and a whim and an idea, maybe not unlike yours.
That's the key. That's the key to the whole story. They had the passion for it.
To just say, whatever my headwinds are going to be, I'm going to survive them.
Yeah, yeah.
And so what is it to you then that wine does that? Because it's bitten me now, and I didn't have it 30 years ago. I was just business for me, and my career's, not as elaborate as most, but it's interesting. But I'm going to say maybe the last 5 years, so 25 years of tasting wines, where I said, it took a little while for the aha moment, whatever you want to call it, the moment I say, like the ratatouille moment, where the food critic tastes that ratatouille for the first time. They reminded him of his mother's cooking. What was it about George Tabor's? Was it the tasting itself that's where you decided, wow, this is really now a fascinating thing? Or was it prior to that?
No, because, again, I was a reporter for Time Magazine in those days. And, you had to do all sorts of stories, pick stories about, this subject or that subject or this new thing, this old thing, whatever it is. And so, the tasting at the Paris tasting was, it would have been very easy for me not to have gone that day.
Yeah.
Because nobody else was there. And so
some young French girl walks by, bumps you on the Champs-Elysees, and she's like, let's have a drink, and you're done. You're not going to go to the tasting.
Yeah.
But you had to submit the idea first. Is that correct?
I had to tell Time Magazine, hey, there was this event that's going to be next week in Paris, and I think it's an interesting story. There's some of the people are here, but then go to it, taste it, and see what happens. And chances are the California wines are not going to do very well, but that's okay. But we'll just see what happens.
See what happens. So were you were? I know that you were going to Stephen's class today, but did you really have this ethereal experience with wine yet? Did you really realize this is not just an alcoholic beverage? It actually is a representative, like Mike Salacci of Opus One says, it represents a time and a place for that bottle of wine. Had that happened yet, or he just still in Paris enjoying cassoulet and wine?
Well, I had been working in France at that point for well over a year maybe even up to 2 years. I should check on that exactly but it was, I'd been there. I spoke very good French, so I could get around, get the stories, get all the stories, have the interesting things. And this was just another different story that day.
No, it's just
Something else. And we even covered a whole part of the world in those days. We went down to there's other parts of France to do other stories, and so it would have been a very easy thing for me to skip the story and go off and pick up something else. Fortunately, it didn't happen. I went and the one in Paris.
Phenomenal. It doesn't.
There's luck, damn luck, and stupidity.
Yeah, I suppose. I'm a firm believer in luck is a preparation meets opportunity, and the things that what you were able to produce. Maybe the fact that a young French woman didn't bump you on the Champs-Élysées and you went off with her is luck, but you being there at the time this is happening and thinking maybe this is a story, that all comes just from experience and being part of the program. Tell me about the other parts of France at that time, the wine districts. You've got the south of France, you got the Languedoc, you've got Burgundy, of course, which is obviously very famous at the time, but the Châteauneuf-du-Pape, the Rhone area. Were those considered elegant places for wine that people would study or be interested in knowing?
Oh, yes. So, the great wines of France, no matter where they were. But the thing was that since in Paris, it was easier to get around the stories and pick up stories and decide this is the one that's going to be. And also what would happen that day was that, I could have gone to, some stories in Belgium, or around there, any place in France. But, I decided to pick out and propose to time, and that's say, I didn't predict the story to the Time editors. I just said, hey, there's something's going to be happening next week. I think it might be interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and take a story, take a picture that day, and see what happes. Who knows?
How many other George Tabors were there in France at the time for Time magazine in Paris?
There were a total of all of the staff at Time would have been 3 or 4 main reporters.
So that's where it's not luck, George. It's you had an interest in something and you saw the opportunity and it happened. That's incredible. So I'm going to read you a paragraph from Ernest Hemingway's book, and I want to talk about the societal value of wine in general. So he writes this: as I ate the oysters with the strong taste of the sea and their faint metallic taste that the cold wine washed away, leaving only the sea taste and the succulent texture, and as I drank their cold liquid from each shell and washed it down with crisp taste of the wine, I lost the empty feeling and began to be happy and to make plans. And that last sentence for me is a huge sentence for what I tell my customers, what I try to instill in the value of a good glass of wine, because it loses the empty feeling and you want to make plans, so to speak. And you don't do that with beer, you don't do it with gin, you don't do it with bourbon, but you do it with wine. And to me, that ethereal value is what makes this beverage, this ancient beverage, right? I mean, they founded an intact Armenian, I'm Armenian, so we know these things, but they found this 6,000-year-old winery, buried in the dirt with shoes and amphora, right? So somewhere in the history of man, somebody fermented a grape, or the grape fermented on its own, and they bit into it. And this was pretty good stuff, right? So it seems to me the French lifestyle, and I talked about this with Rex Pickett, the guy that wrote Sideways. the French paradox, which was, they've been drinking wine forever, and they're thinner than Americans, they live longer than Americans, and they take life slower than Americans. Was that something that intrigued you with being in Paris and that slow food and a good glass of wine?
Oh, absolutely. Because, the France was the high point of everything that you could do in Europe at that point. I I could have gone to Germany or Belgium or other places, but if you wanted to go to a really great country with great wines, great politics, great stories, go to Paris. That's what I wanted to do, was to go to Paris.
Would you tell young journalists or young enthusiasts for wine, even, hey, go to Paris, learn another culture, learn another language? Had you, like you said, you spoke very good French, which I study French now, and it's a tough language, right?
Yeah.
Did you know French before you got there?
I had studied in college.
No, so
I had 2 years of college, but that didn't get me very far.
that's where you get there, you realize you didn't learn anything, right?
Yeah.
So much different now. But would you make that recommendation if somebody came to you today, a journalist or a young college student that just got out of college, is like, what do you want to do? Like I did yesterday with this young lady. She says, I want to learn about wine. I'm like, well, you can read all the books you want, but until you sit down and taste it with people and learn a culture around it, it's going to be difficult to understand it.
I totally agree with you. You've got to experience it. You got to see what it's all about. What it is, and because the French will love to talk to you about wine. They will not ever, throw you out saying, hey, you know about wine. No,
Yeah, right.
they love their wine.
They love their.
They will help you love wine as well.
It's interesting because you said that when we use the word passion between the California winemakers at the time of the 70s, and maybe my renaissance of understanding this is come about from doing these conversations. I've been doing videos with winemakers for probably 10 years now, and it's the formula starts to come around. The formula is not the chemistry. Like we talked about earlier, you can go to school to learn the chemistry, but these guys are making wines that today are still fantastic wines without the chemistry, right? It was the value of the bootstrap education. And, but one thing for sure that I get out of winemakers from all over the world, whether it's Croatia or Italy or France, is there's a deep rooted, in passion. Now at this point, doesn't even work.
It's just the love. They love the wine that they're working with.
It's so interesting to me that is part of it. All right. So we win. We won this thing. And it's like, what? And it gets printed in the Time magazine. It's got a little blurb. We don't even know who George Tabor is yet. And it kind of starts to snowball around that this thing won. And my dad wrote about it, I think, in August of, I think it was in the August newsletter of 1976. When did it have the sort of sales? Let's talk business. When did it have the sales pull through? When is like, oh my God, we're going to run out of Chateau 73 Montelena Chard. We're going to run out of the Stag's Leap Cab. When did that happen?
As soon as the story got into the paper the following week, as soon as Americans saw what was happening, then they started rushing all around the country to see, hey, you have these wines. Can we buy these wines? Where can we buy these wines? Hey, these wines, they're supposed to be really great. You got to tell me where can I get them? So the
big retailer back then was in New York, Ackerman, Merrill and Ackerman. And one of the big retailers back then. Were the wines even distributed on the East Coast by then? Do you know if you could get money?
Very few.
Who would have done that, right?
Because there wasn't market for it.
Yeah, who cared? So now vintage 74. I can't remember the 74 Chateau Montelena because we had it. I'm sure we had it. Mr. Barrett used to come to my dad's store all the time, and he's like, one day he comes to my dad's store. He goes, "Hey, Paul." He goes, my dad's name was Paul also. He says, can you help me out? I go, everybody in Palos Verdes wants to, all the socialites, right? They all want to have me, they all want to me to donate wines. So can you just put them in the store so I can just send them to your place? And I was like, sure, I'll put them in. So we had the Riesling, and we had the Chardonnay, and we had whatever else they were making at the time, 2 years before the tasting. But there at that time too in Palos Verdes, we had who was the other family that started in the big winery. My dad used to feel like he was outclassed, like this was now this elite. My mind right now escapes me, but I don't. As a young guy stocking the shelves, I don't remember a surge. I don't remember those things. I was too young. I do know that Warren stayed at our house, and this was before the tasting. My dad bought his Riesling because he couldn't afford the cab at the time, and I was just looking at on my office. I have the old flip boards that whenever I was a kid at the cash register and somebody bought a bottle of wine, we didn't price them on the bottle. You would come and put it on the counter, and then you would flip through this board sheet that my dad had. And so I have some on my desk, and we have all these things. We have, we have Burgess, and we had Stone Creek or Stone Valley. We had Montelena. We had Stag's Leap, and they were like $2.50. For the whites. So, and the reds were like what, $4 or $5, I think, or $6 was like a big expensive Cabernet at the time. So do you think then it's almost impossible today to go to Napa and buy a land and expect to make any money?
Yeah.
And it's almost that these iconic brands that have been around forever, Burgess and Stag's Leap and Chateau Montelena, if they haven't sold to corporate America yet, that have the land paid off, and now they're getting premium money for the wines because of the history. Did you get a piece of that, George? Did anybody thank you by?
Not one bit. The winemakers at that point, they didn't really, they had a tough time selling wines.
Yeah.
And then until the Time magazine story came out. As soon as the Time magazine story came out, people come rushing out, especially out of New York and the big capital cities. And then they just said, hey, do you have any of this California wine from Montelena? I don't know what the name of it is, but something like that. And buy me a case of that.
Phenomenal. And so then the rush had to happen.
Then the rush happened, and it was
to Napa and
crazy, and Napa was never the same again.
And now it's different again. We sort of prefer Sonoma to the extent that it's less commercial now.
Right.
Paso Robles being coming onto the map is still a cowboy town, and Napa's gotten pretty commercial. And I was interviewed by the Napa Valley Register recently and the Wine Gal, and it was not an interview about me. I thought it was going to be about my business and what we've done all these years, but it was about how can we help these wineries compete now, because it's so expensive to produce wine in Napa that you have to sell it for $100 a bottle or more, and the marketplace for those things isn't that big. The iconic brands like Caymus and Silver Oak, they're getting it, but if you're a boutique guy and you have to charge $150 a bottle and nobody knows who you are, it's a tough animal.
Oh yeah.
A really tough animal. Now, I can tell you, George, that COVID has been amazing for my business. Anybody that's direct to the consumer in America that had all the pieces in place, I'm waiting for COVID-20 because it may be politically incorrect to say, but we're selling a ton of wine right now. All right. Well, we could talk, and I hope we can do it again, but I want to close with the next 10 minutes or so about the book on cork, because when I looked you up to talk about some of the things, and I saw this book, Le Bouche, in French, right? Le Bouche. What compelled somebody? Yeah, there's a comment.
Okay.
What would compel somebody to write a book on corks?
Well, after the Paris tasting, I could write it out any book that I wanted to.
Yeah, right.
The publishers suddenly discovered me.
Yeah.
And so, these things turned out to be just outstanding subjects that they could learn a lot more about winery. As I wanted to learn about all the great wines of the world, and that's how
it happened. So you dispelled like the first few pages, which I haven't finished the book all the way, but you completely ruined my social club. I give speeches at Rotary Club in Kiwanis, and they all about wine. Totally blew my rap because I have a piece of cork from my uncle Art, who passed away last year, 2 years ago, had participated with Coca-Cola in 1985 in assembling a piece of synthetic cork to a bar cap to make a bar cap closure for Taylor Cellars. So this is way before the idea of a foam synthetic cork was being used in St. Francis or Barefoot Cellars or whoever was using it, in the early 90s. And you said in the book that Dom Perignon did not invent a cork. And that's one of my trivia questions, Who invented the cork for wine as well? Dom Perignon, the blind monk. And they also, I think you say in there, he wasn't even blind. Maybe he wasn't, he actually could see. And so now I have to change all my trivia questions because I've read the book. But it's a fascinating story. And I think it's important for people to understand because it is a question that I get. Probably one of the most prolific questions I get is, what's the screw cap? What's the point of it? Why is it better or worse instead of cork? And so, but you just thought it was an interesting subject to peel back, to have people understand, because you really dug deep into it.
Yeah, because it's a difficult subject. There's no question. It's not an easy subject, to make these wines and then sell them to other places. And so, I thought it was really important to learn about, what the great wines of the world were made from, and how the Californian wines could come in with them.
Yeah, you did it. I forgot that part too. You've got some amazing depth in New Zealand here. I wanted to, I just lost a train of thought, but it was the screw cap, which is when I was stocking the shelf in 1976, 1975, and it was Gallo, Rhine wine and red Burgundy and that stuff, Chablis, or my uncle would call it Chablis. It always connotated a negative thing. And the general public thinks the cork is this romantic thing, which is true. And I just did a whole special email on canned wines. That I tasted probably, I don't know, maybe 75 canned wines. I found 5 really good wines. I found a Russian River Pinot in a 250 ml. I found a Lodi Cab vintaged in a 187 that was very good. You pour it in a glass, people have a hard time even thinking it's canned. But I have to tell you, I in a whim, it was a mistake, applied to study under the MW program. Now I'm 61. It's probably not a great time to start, but I decided I would try. And one of the questions that I got for the application was, what's happening with the marketing of wine and the value of the closure, and should we keep up with the times like cans or Tetra Paks or those kinds of things? And I wrote this is actually the best part of my application, as far as they are concerned, that they liked, because I had a kid ask me just weeks before to help them understand the packaging of a CBD drink, the CBD oil, the stuff that they harvest from marijuana that is not the hallucinogenic part or the narcotic part. It's supposed to make you feel better, like aspirin.
Yeah.
He was making a drink out of it. Mm-hmm. And he was asking me, Mr. Callen, what do you think I should do with this? Should I put it in a cork? We want the elegance of a cork. Pull the cork out of the bottle and make the sound. And I wrote this in the application to the Master of Wine. They liked this because it was a contemporary application of a closure. But the punchline was, I asked the kid, I go, what does it taste like? He goes, tastes like crap. So, how was this book received by people? Was it?
Oh, the book has done very well. I
That's
mean, because Americans are still learning about wine, and so the book is part of their education.
It's one of the most, and I couldn't believe it had been done, but it's a very granular look at what was happening. I want to tell you a quick story, and we'll get you off because I know you have a hard stop. But when my Uncle Art was working with Coca-Cola on this Taylor Stellar's cork, and his job, he was an MIT master's mechanical engineer, so his job was to take this synthetic cork, the little bar top size, and glue it to the bar cap. And he had to make the machine that would do that, oriented and all that stuff. In the meantime, the company in Ontario, I forgot the name of it now, was using synthetic corks, and it was St. Francis was one of the few wineries that was using it in California. I think Barefoot Cellars was using it. And I said, let's go out, Unc, and we'll go see this machine. So we go to the machine, we climb around. I positioned myself as bottling some wine, and he was my engineer, and we had overalls on, and they take us back into the warehouse, and there's the machine making corks. And we get in the car, and this is how brilliant the guy was. He says, it'll never work. I go, why not? He goes, because the machine they're using is for Italian shoe soles. And he goes, the temperature of the foam as it gets to the outer mold is going to be different than the inner mold, and they're going to have inconsistent corks. And then he explained to me why the cell size would be different. And so we got back to the house, and we cut the corks in half, and he was exactly right. So I called Mike Houlihan at Barefoot, and I called the St. Francis winemaker. I forgot his name at the time. I go, how's it going? He goes, well, it's going okay, but every now and then the cork bends and doesn't go in the bottle. And it was exactly the symptom that Art was telling us about, which was the cell structure of the cork. So I want to thank you for this time, George. I know you have to get off, and I want to reserve the right to come out and see you and do this live and peel it back a little bit more, or potentially do it again on Zoom calls. But it's been a fascinating conversation, and we appreciate what you brought to the industry. I can tell you that I thank you, because my career has been based on the fact that you did this. So,
well, I was lucky.
Well, I don't know.
I could have gone, that day to another story, and California wines probably would become known, 5 or 10 years later. But it was lucky that day in Paris, and I was there.
Somebody put you there at the right time, at the right place, for the right story to the world, and that's the part that really is really special for what you've done. So thanks again for the time.
Thank you.
I'll send you a link to this when it gets posted, and I hope I can come see you in Rhode Island or Vero Beach. Maybe that'll be better.
Okay.
Sure.
Let me get to California.
Yeah, that too. We'll be here. I know Steven's coming. I can't remember if it's October or November, but he'll be in Napa. And if you're available, join us up there.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Cheers. Thank you.
Good to talk to you.
Take care.